cat. Did you hear it's a 3 blind mice build? So now we just need a judge for this contest. Hey there folks, Chuck here. Now this build was originally supposed to be a 3 blind mice build for the month of March, and last I checked my sundial, it's not March. And if you want to hear all about that, I recommend you watch my unboxing video where I explain where I've been for the last few weeks to a month. But we're moving onward and upward, so we're going to get straight to the build because I had a lot of fun with this one and got to try out a bunch of new stuff, and I'm looking forward to sharing my work with you. So let's get to the casting. This is a 1970 Pontiac GTO Judge made by Hot Wheels. It came out in 2011 and has been running ever since. This particular iteration is a 2020 release from the American Steel series. It is, according to Hot Wheels Wikipedia, green with yellow stripes with black fill, and that is accurate. While it says that it was a Walmart exclusive on the wiki, I found this one at the Dollar Tree, which was a very nice find indeed. But enough about the trivia, let's boogie. That's right, we're jumping straight past all the drilling and the priming. You know how that goes, and we're getting straight to the prep. There was a lot of chrome plastic on this particular casting, and Oven Cleaner made quick work of that. It's amazing watching that stuff just eat the chrome right off the plastic. Remember to always be in a well-ventilated space when using Easy Off, because it is probably the most caustic thing that I've worked with as far as chemicals go, and it just gets in your lungs and stays. So be sure to be well ventilated when it comes to applying this to your chrome pieces. It's even nastier than the aircraft stripper, which you can see did a real number on the paint and tampos here. They, again, just melted right off. I love this stuff. I have plenty of citrus strip that I got on clearance at Walmart one day, so that will probably get me set up for the rest of my career as a YouTube diecast customizer, but while I've got this stuff, I'm going to really enjoy using it because it just works so darn quick. I knew going into this I wanted to do a Mad Max / Gaslands style build, and the Judge itself just kind of lends itself well to that sort of thing. Judge Dredd springing to mind. It felt like this would be a great candidate for that sort of build. So I knew I wanted to have a really rough, well-worn body to this vehicle, so I really went nuts on the Dremel tool, really hacking into it and making the body panels look really like they've been dented and beaten out and dented back in again and beaten out again. Pretty much every part of the GTO looked banged up in some way or another, and the actual construction of a GTO lent a little bit to being a problem for this because I forgot until I had started into this, and fortunately remembered before I'd gone too far, that the nose of the GTO is actually fiberglass and not steel, so it would not have been dented, it would have shattered. So because it was made of fiberglass, I decided that I needed to have a logical reason for that nose cone still being in place. So I built something that kind of tells that story, and we'll get to that later in the build. I bought a Matchbox 5-pack a while back, and it came with this irrigation tractor that is way off scale and pretty much useless for the kind of stuff that I do. And then I started looking at it and realized it had all these really great pieces to it. And this is why I hang on to all of those oddball castings and the fantasy cars that I know I'm never going to really want to build, because they're worth more in pieces to me than they are as whole cars. It's always handy to have a backlog of spare vehicles to choose from when building these Mad Max Gasland style builds. I knew I wanted to do a gritty and oily version of weathering this time around, so I went with a tarnished black from Polyscale instead of the typical railroad-tie brown that I use to imitate dirt and mud. This was either tarnished black, oily black, or grimy black. I kind of used the three as the spirit moves within me, and whatever I feel will go best. I believe this is oily black, now that I'm looking at it. I originally wasn't planning on it being a 4x4. I was thinking of it being more of a street machine type post-apocalyptic vehicle. But as I disassembled that irrigation tractor, I really kind of dug the tires. I usually try to use rubber tires on my builds, but these little plastic guys kind of stood out to me, and I thought, I'm going to see what I can do with these and make something of them. Obviously, just putting them on the vehicle was not going to work though with the stock frame, so I had to get clever, and I had this box tube was a handy size for axle tubing, and of course most axle tubing isn't square, but this is the underside of a 1/64th scale car, so I'm not that worried about those kind of details. Plus I knew there was going to be a lot of cover on the base of the car, and ideally you're not looking at it from the underside, so I didn't worry about it too much. On one of the Facebook modeling groups that I am a part of, I saw where somebody had built a 1/24th scale car with a really cool weather-beaten interior that had a red seat, a brown seat, and a tan bench, and I really liked that. I had really never thought of doing multiple colors or more than 2 colors on the interior, so I stole that idea and used that on this interior here. I used a soldering iron to gouge the seats and make them look torn, and really it was just a matter of getting it on the lowest heat setting you can and just barely touching it, because the plastic is so thin and small, and even then the gouges are way too big for the scale. But you're not really going to see the interior too well on the inside of these cars. It's really more for the video and for the fun of knowing that I know the detail is in there, more than for anyone who will look at the car, or even if they get up close, probably not see nearly all the details that are put into it. And I know that's true of a lot of other 1/64 scale builders, and I think that's part of the fun of the hobby. Is it's more about the journey than the destination, and knowing that there's those little touches in there that you know is there and the people who followed the build know is there. I've done roll bars before with my Herbie builds, but I wanted to do a more intensive roll bar, and I used these styrene tubes that have a metal wire running through them, and they're really great for making exhaust pipes and roll bars in this scale because they're very forgiving to work with, and styrene on the outside makes it really easy to paint and also softens the curves, makes things look more like bent tubing rather than just straight kinks in wire. The support pieces were just flat pieces of styrene. Simple, eyeball it, mark it, cut it to fit. Use the super glue and a little accelerant to make the process a little less tedious, so I'm not sitting there with a tweezer for 30 seconds waiting for it to set. I think super glue really kind of entered a new world for me once I discovered that you could use an accelerant to speed up the drying process, or sprinkle baking soda on it to have it cure instantly. It's really kind of been instrumental in helping me get back into the hobby, because so much of the time I couldn't hold 2 pieces together long enough without my hands shaking to ruin the set, or have it set the wrong way, or have it stick to my fingers. And it's something that if you're considering trying it out, I highly recommend you do. It's going to open up a whole new world for you when it comes to miniature building. This was my first time trying out hairspray as a chipping medium, but then as I got into it, I realized that it was probably not too smart to do a reddish-orange color on top of an orangey-brown rust, because it was very difficult to see where the rust stopped and the paint began. And here's where things started to really go off the rails, both for this build and for my hobby in general. I'm not quite sure where it all went wrong, but I think a lot of it had to do with my prep work on the beginning, and I didn't really prep the body as well as I should have. I don't think it was scuffed enough to hold the paint. Well, the chipping process started to go okay. I was bearing down a little too hard in spots, and I think that exposed just enough to let some moisture get in underneath the paint, and things just got worse and worse from there. And as you can see, things kind of fell apart before I could even get to painting the door its alternate color. So I took a beat, took a deep breath, threw some tools around the workshop, and stripped everything down and got back to work. This time I wised up and went with a more high contrast color, and went with more of that banana yellow. I also went to my scratching tools instead of using a stiff brush, and those really did a great job of chipping up the paint and revealing the rust underneath. While the chipping effect was nice in and of itself, I felt like the body needed more, and I wasn't really sure how to get it there. So I took a break from the body and got to that nose cone protection justification that I was talking about. And that justification came in the form of a giant wedge on the front of the car. And I wanted to make it removable just because I'm still pretty new with fabricating pieces like this, and I figured that in case it didn't go well, I would like to be able to display it with the push bar or the push wedge, whatever you want to call it, off. And I ended up pretty happy with how it turned out. I used a butane torch to melt some dents into the diamond plate, and I went a little too far in one spot, and that ended up being one of those happy accidents where I remembered I had ordered some scale signs from Action Toys. I thought those signs would be a great opportunity to patch the over-aggressive dent I made on the plow, while at the same time adding a little bit of humor to the build. Honestly, it was pretty difficult to decide which street sign to use because you got like do not enter and be prepared to stop, no left turns, and I ended up with the no turns one because that was the one that I decided was still funny, but was also one that I was least likely to use in a diorama build later. A quick touch of a soldering iron to the styrene is really all you need to create some artillery damage to the diamond plate, and I touched it up with a little silver pin on some of them to show that they were more freshly damaged, and rusted out some of the others both on the car and on the plow. On diecast metal, it's pretty easy to simulate battle damage by using a quick punch or an automatic punch, however you want to call it. Giving the metal a pop with the punch, that soft diecast metal gives fairly easily and creates a pretty convincing bit of battle damage. It was at about this point that I realized I had gotten into a serious weathering rut and wasn't really sure where I was going. I call it weathering jazz, where I'm just kind of making things up on the fly. And sometimes it lends itself well to unexpected results, and sometimes you end up with a big mess and realize you've just been weathering the same thing over and over for hours. So I decided to get a little help, and that help came in the form of this Vallejo rust stain and streaking kit. I know I can do all of this stuff myself individually, but what appealed to me about this was it came with instructions and kind of a step-by-step thing, and at this point I was spinning out so far into weathering ether, I needed to get back to basics. And I really enjoyed this kit because it kind of walks you through just step by step getting all the layering correct and getting me back on track. And I think this is a great kit if you're looking to get into weathering. I really enjoyed how neatly it laid things out and really kind of makes it simple to understand the techniques and the layers that need to go into stuff. And after this build, I actually created my own Google Doc that is a step-by-step guide for myself so I don't end up in weathering jazz hell again, because much like most jazz, that it's not very appealing to just about anyone. Leave your angry comments about my thoughts on jazz in the comments below. I'm not going to walk you through what all I did with this because it was a step-by-step process, and if you buy the kit, I think it's like $20. I highly recommend it, and honestly, one drop of each of these is all you need to do a small car. So this is going to last me a very, very long time, and the step-by-step guide is really helpful and helped me get back on track, and I think the car looks a lot better for it. Once all that was finished, I gave it a shot of matte varnish to seal all of the weathering up, and moved on to the rest of the car. Once I had the matte coat dry, I did some test fits and made an important discovery, and that was that the glass in this particular casting does a lot to fill in the gap between the interior and the body of the car. So there were some pretty sizable gaps between the dashboard and the rear deck, so I whipped up some milliput, smashed the interior up inside of the car to get the fit right, and that solved that problem. I ended up with some extra milliput, so I decided to do a little bit of a better job with the chassis and try to make it look like a 4x4 conversion had been done to the car. So I made a rough semblance of a transfer case and some axle pumpkins and threw some styrene rod in there to serve as drive shafts, and all of that's going to get covered up anyway, so I wasn't too worried about getting overly detailed. And again, I'm not building this for you to look at the underside of the car. The machine gun is actually very, very old. It was from a model airplane that my grandfather built. It was from a Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver kit that he had built decades ago, and I've had this bin full of his old aircraft that have been destroyed by many of the various cats my family has had through the years. And it was one of those gonna fix them up someday bins, and it was like 3 or 4 dozen aircraft in this bin, and I realized the other day I'm just never going to get around to repairing them, so I think the best thing I can do to honor his memory is to disassemble everything useful from those kits and incorporate them into my own. So this is a little tribute to my family. He built a lot of models. My adopted grandfather built a lot of model aircraft, and my dad and I built model aircraft cars and a gigantic space shuttle model. So it's kind of a nod to my family's roots in model building to include this machine gun in this build. And yes, I'm aware it's the wrong scale, but as anyone who's built miniatures for a while knows, miniatures are all about mind over matter. If you don't mind, it don't matter. The half windshield armor plating was just some diamond plate that I had left over and some half round styrene that I cut to fit, and drilled a couple holes and filed out a little rectangle in the middle for the driver to see through. I didn't do anything too fancy with the weathering here. It was just tarnished black with some typhus corrosion and Ryza rust on top to get it to stand out, and a little of that Vallejo rust wash over the top. The rear window is covered with just some nylon mesh screening from a screen door project we had done a while back that I had extra lying around, and makes a pretty good makeshift chain link in this scale. All I did with it was shoot it with some Rust-Oleum rust red primer and went over it with a little silver weathering powders just to give it a touch of metallic. Hey, remember that irrigation tractor from earlier on in the video? Well, this is part of it, and it became a really cool bit of sci-fi nonsense to attach to the trunk. Again, I can't say enough good things about the Gundam panel line markers. They do a fantastic job of helping various panels of the car stand out and giving the miniature a feel of weight wouldn't have otherwise, even with like a black wash. Like, I feel like these markers really give it that extra depth. This time around, I didn't even bother with the Molotov pen. I just went straight for the toothpick and got the chrome off of it, because while the pins aren't great, the finish is fantastic, and I haven't been able to replicate it with anything else as far as replicating chrome, especially worn chrome, with the Molotov pens. So I made the toothpick work, and everything went on very smoothly, from the headlights to the bumpers. So everything from this point on was taken about 3 weeks after what you've seen so far, because that was when I had my incident and boxed everything up and threw it in the shed, and sat on my hands for a few weeks figuring out what I was going to do with my life. And so this is the renewal of the project, and while I was away and thinking about it, I was poking around on Pinterest and found this really cool GTO that serendipitously is also done up in a Mad Max theme, and I really liked the roof rack exterior roll cage and wanted to recreate that. I used my auto punch to create some divots and made a makeshift roll cage out of, again, the styrene wrapped. It's by far the most versatile tool in doing scratch building at this scale. Once the 2 outer bars were done, it was just a matter of finding some more scrap styrene to connect the dots and cement them all together. And at last, it was finally time to start bringing all the pieces together. And I accessorized the vehicle with a series of parts that I got from everywhere from Mark Vickers on eBay to Action Farm Toys to Boston Implement. Once everything was painted and detailed, it was time to do the decals. And because I was doing a roof rack, I wanted to make sure everything on the roof rack was detailed as much as possible. So I found a way to incorporate a little bit of a decal into each one of the things on the roof. And that was a lot of fun to dig through both industrial labels and post-apocalyptic humor labels to find stuff to detail. This go around I tried something different. I had heard that if you use a 50-50 mix of white vinegar and water instead of just straight warm water when working with decals, it really helps with the decal setting, and I am pleased to report that this is accurate. It is an excellent way to get the decals to set. It actually almost works a little too well, so if you're not careful, the decals can set down and stick before you're finished moving them into place. But again, that's why I print lots of spares. Of course, these things can't look like they're just sitting open in a roof rack. So I used a little bit of some narrow masking tape and cut it down to make it look like ratchet straps. And it did a great job without really doing anything to them. I think I hit them with a little powder later to distress them just a little bit. I also had this really fine jeweler's chain that I weathered with some Blacken It. It's like a blue chemical that turns steel black. And it's also known as a bluing agent. You can just look up bluing agent for steel on Amazon or at your hobby shop, and basically any of those chemicals will work fine. Just be careful with them because they are a little on the caustic side. Also, if you haven't had the chance yet, there's a whole bunch of buttons underneath this video, and if you punch them, it really makes me happy and it makes YouTube happy. So let's make a bunch of people happy and push some buttons. These pencils were something new. They're from AK Interactive, and they're a weathering pencil set. It's a chipping set, and I wanted to try it out. And even though you're not going to see any of the wood on this roof rack, I wanted to see what the wood weathering did when I applied it, and this was a good way to test it out. Overall, I'm marginally satisfied with it. It didn't stick nearly as well as I was hoping it would to the paint, and that's probably because it needs to have a matte varnish applied before you apply the pencils. I think with a little more practice, I could find cool ways to make this work on future builds. Here's where I applied the patina green to all of the electrical pieces on the side of the GTO to give it a weathered electrical appearance, so the copper wasn't too bright and bold and had that worn penny look to it that copper gets when it's left exposed to the elements for a long time. And it wouldn't be a Flying Valiant build if I didn't also bust out the Doc's weathering powders and add some gritty gray and grimy black to make everything look a little extra dingy. A laser etched wood shovel was a lot of fun to detail, and I gave it a little strip of the black masking tape to make it look like it was strapped onto the side of the fender, and of course a little Zappa gap is what's really holding it on. At long last, it was time for final assembly, so I could get to the weathering that actually ties everything together, the mud splatters and the extra dust. It was at this point my little helper came by and wanted to do some painting herself, so we set aside some time to get out her favorite colors and let her do a little decorating. And with everything on the GTO back together, it was time to bust out the wilder, light textured earth again and go over the tires and the underside of the vehicle to make everything look good and mud splattered. And then I used the Doc's weathering powder gritty gray over the top of the light textured earth to bring the splatter up a little bit without bringing too much texture up onto the side of the car to make it look like it was splattered but not caked. I then touched up around the car with a little bit of brown wash and some black wash just to make sure that the details of the wheels and some of the chassis didn't get lost. The great thing about this Wilder's textured earth is that it's water-based, so it's very easy to water it down and make sure that the grit gets where it belongs, like between the treads of the tires instead of on top of the treads of the tires. You can see here I went a little overboard with the textured earth and I used some water to calm it all down. It's very easy to go overboard with this textured paint, especially with this scale. So remember, less is more, and the good news is as long as it's wet, it's still very easy to get off. Again, some more black wash to bring out the details again. This is another part of the build where I dangerously came close to wandering into weathering jazz area, and I recognized that and pulled myself back and got back to finishing the job. And that meant applying the Flying Valiant sticker to the bottom, giving it the number 0005, and calling it a day. And once again, here's what we started out with, the 1970 GTO Judge from Hot Wheels. This is overall a great casting, and one of the reasons why I kept the interior was just because I really liked the full interior. I was originally going to do a stripped down interior, but the details on this interior made me think twice about getting rid of it. overall, the body was well proportioned and very easy to work with. I liked how segmented this car was. It was nice to have the front all together and not have the plasticky bits be in the way. It didn't have a lot of casting lines or any details that needed to be addressed. Of course, even if it did, it didn't matter because I was going to weather the heck out of this thing. So let's see what we ended up with. And there it is, a Judge of the Wasteland. Overall, I'm really happy with how this turned out. I'm not happy that it took as long as it did, but there was other stuff that needed to be addressed outside of the workbench, and that got addressed, and now it's nice to be back doing this thing that I enjoy and sharing my work with you. It really means a lot, all the wonderful comments and responses I've gotten from sharing my most recent video, and really encourages me to keep building and keep sharing my builds with you. So thanks again for those comments. If you like this video, again, please click the like, click the subscribe, do all the button pushing, and let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of post-apocalyptic builds. If you've done ones like this one, I would love to see them. I'd love to hear about them. So tell me all about them. And if you want to follow the fun on Instagram, you can follow me at Flying Valiant on Instagram, and you can find the Flying Valiant page on Facebook as well, and we can connect that way. And I'm on a bunch of the custom diecast build groups on Facebook, so you can find me there as well. I've got a few new builds coming up that I'm really excited about, so please stay tuned. And those will be completely different from this one. I've got two very different builds from what I've done previously on this channel, so I hope you'll enjoy those and stick around for those. And I'm also thinking of doing a diorama project. As you see, I have a garage backdrop in the reveal sections of these videos that I made, and it's a lot of fun. It's a very modular setup that I made on purpose for taking photos, but I'd like to do more of a real diorama street scene. So if that's something you'd be interested in following, let me know in the comments below, and maybe I'll share that build on this channel, or maybe I'll just keep it on Instagram. Once again, I appreciate you coming along with me for the ride. So until next time, stay fresh, cheese bags.